For the longest time, everybody thought we were perfect here. Today was intended to go the way it did. And I'm going to tell you why. Because it's always good to sit back and reflect. And even in sometimes a little bit of missteps, you can gain knowledge and understanding in a misstep and reflection. In class, we were talking about taking ownership. I'm going to blame all y'all. No, it's all good. We were trying to do something different. We had originally ran out of the all-in-one cups, sent out an email to everyone, or to a lot of different people, all to the men especially. And there was vacillation all over the place. Some women also chimed in, and there was vacillation there. We don't know what to do. So this was the best we could figure out on the spur of the moment. Now, what I will not tell you, and you did not hear this from me, I figured we'd have some problems today. And so I ordered another small box of the all-in-one cups. And they're under the communion table. But more and more, we can get back to where we were. In the song we just sang, it talked about the song of Moses. And that's kind of what we want to talk about today. The song of Moses, because I was thinking about the song of Moses a lot lately. And I guess what got me to thinking about it was the length. It's found back in the book of Deuteronomy, 32nd chapter. And I guess what triggered me thinking about the length was I had my computer, I listen to Pandora when I'm working. And sometimes I'll put it on a specific channel and put it on Tommy Emmanuel sometimes and think of Randy or any number of other types of music. But this particular day, I put it on shuffle. So I really, would go through all sorts of different kinds of music. And so I was there working, and all of a sudden I heard dun, 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 dun. And I went, oh no, here's 20 minutes of the same song. Because the song was from Iron Butterfly, and it was called In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. And everybody thought, oh, it's a great song because it's 20 minutes long. It's one of the easiest songs to play, whether you're playing the organ, the bass, or the drum. I mean, it's easy. I mean, even the garage bands I played in as in high school, and we could play that song. And you just play it over and over again until nauseam. But I thought of the song of Moses, not the idea of ad nauseum, but rather the length of it. Because when you begin to read the song of Moses, oh, it's long. And we look at it and we go, well, where's the meter? Where's the tempo? Where's the poetry? Because when you have a song, you got to have poetry. But not so much when you're looking at it from the standpoint of the Jewish culture, the nation of Israel. And so the 32nd Psalm is exactly that. It is a song that Moses writes. And by the way, Moses, some of the Psalms that we have in the book of Psalms are attributed to Moses as well. Go into the 32nd chapter. And what you're going to find is that this song, while it's expansive, it's right on target. Because what it does is it addresses clearly the fidelity of God, the trustworthiness of God. And it echoes what Paul writes in 2 Timothy, the 2nd chapter, and verses 11 through 13. And that's a set of passages you've heard me refer to a lot. Because it does talk about how even though we may be faithless, God constantly remains faithful. He will not deny himself. But now notice what's found in Deuteronomy 32, verse 15 beginning. But Jeshurun. Now stop. You go, where's that word from? The word is simply Israel. That's all that word means. And it is a worthy name that had been attributed to Israel, but here Moses uses it kind of in derision. And you'll see as it plays out exactly how it is used in that sense. There's a level of irony in it. He goes on to say, but Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. Some translations, instead of kicked, use the word sleek. Grew fat and sleek. And we go, well, how does that turn? How does that work out? I was telling Adam the other day, you're not fat, you're just easier to see. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, and what are you then? And I said, I'm real easy to see. But when we think of fat and sleek, it just doesn't go together. Although when you look at me, you go, yeah. Instead of sleek, fat and slick or whatever. But that's the way he starts this section. You are grown fat, thick, sleek. Then he forsook God who made him and scorned the rock of his salvation. They made him jealous with strange gods. With abominations, they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons who were not God, to gods whom they had not known, new gods who came lately, whom your fathers did not dread. You neglected the rock who begot you, forgot the God who gave you birth. Well, he lays it all out. Now, again, this is just a central part of this particular song. They took the worthy name that had been given to them. They sullied it. They drug it through the mud. But the part that really resonates is verse 16. They made him jealous. Whoa. That's rather profound when you think about it. They made him jealous because God had looked at Israel as one looks at a spouse. And then to think that the spouse whom you are totally devoted to would go and find solace with another. It's cause for jealousy. Hold your finger here in Deuteronomy 32 and flip back into the book of Psalms. And in Psalms, we're going to go into the 44th Psalm. And in that 44th Psalm, we're going to drop down into verse 20. Psalms 44, verse 20. The psalmist writes the following. If we had forgotten the name of our God or extended our hands to a strange God, would not God find this out? For he knows the secrets of the heart. He then goes on to say, but for thy sake we are being killed all day long. He's talking about the fact that God had every right to be jealous. That indeed Israel did seek out someone else. But probably the more definitive example of this can be seen back in the book of Ezekiel, 16th chapter. Don't turn there yet, because we're going to go there and we're going to watch as it all is laid out. But above all, what we're reminded of is that Israel had it all. That God had provided everything to them. And their repayment to him was ingratitude and the utmost of disrespect. It was as if they stood back and spat in his face. And this is the central part of this song of Moses. But also notice in this song, talks a lot about the rock. The rock, and the rock became known as being Jesus. He is the rock which you rejected, but which became the very cornerstone. Israel turned its back on Christ. Israel turned its back on God the Father. And all the way through the Old Testament, we see it time after time after time. They had peace, they had glory, they had honor. And yet, by and through their attitudes and actions, they turned their back on God. Yet through all of it, God maintained his faithfulness and wanted only what's best for the nation. If only they would come back to him. If only they would return. Peace could be theirs. Prosperity would be named again among them. It was all within their grasp. See, as far back as the promise made to Abraham, that he would give them, to Abraham and his offspring, land, seed, nation, promise. All the nations of the earth would be blessed through his seed. Israel was now beginning to see it. They were on the cusp of going into the promised land as Moses writes this song. They're there. And all the way through, God had watched over them, providing them manna in quail in the wilderness, providing them water when they had none. Everything was given to them. And they turned their back on God. Well, as we go through and begin to look a little bit closer into this psalm, then begin to blend it together with Ezekiel 16, we'll realize that, yes, when Moses talked about that Israel would grow fat and sleek, that he knew exactly what he was talking about. Because another way you can look at that fat and sleek is that they rebelled against the God of heaven. And truly, they did go into rebellion. Now, when Joshua takes over after the passing of Moses, in the first chapter of Joshua, verses 7 and 8, God promises him that, if you just stay focused on me, and you don't turn to the right, and you don't turn to the left, but you remain focused, you're going to have everything. And you will find success in all that you do. But it is imperative that you remain focused. You find direction. You hold on. And you don't look to anyone else. How easy is that? How simple is that? Olivia Newton-John, I'm not a real big fan of, but she made a song called Hopelessly Devoted to You. Mike and Susan, a few years ago, had tickets to go see her at the Wiltern, I believe it was, and they couldn't go. So they gave them to Linda and I, and we went. And Linda, she really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it as well. But one of the songs that she sang was Hopelessly Devoted to You. And I looked around at the people that sat around us, and all the women were wiping their eyes and kind of shook my head. And then when I saw a guy bigger than me kind of no, but it is a tearjerker. And it was designed to be that. Israel should have been hopelessly devoted to God. Amen. Because of all that God had done for them and the fact that out of the entirety of mankind, he looked with favor on Israel. But they turned their back on him. And they treat him with the utmost of discontent. And how devastating that must have been. See, it was by and through providence that God's care was made evident. You're there in Deuteronomy 32. Look at verse 10. In verse 10, he found him a desert land, and in the howling waste of a wilderness, he encircled him. He cared for him. He guarded him as the pupil of his eye, like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that hovers over its young. He spread his wings and caught them. He carried them on his pinions. The Lord alone guided him, and there was no foreign god in him. And he made him ride on the high places of the earth. And he ate the produce of the land. He made him suck honey from the rock, and oil from the flinty rock, curds of cows and milk of the flock, with fat of lambs and rams, the breed of Bashan, and goats, with the finest of the wheat, and of the blood of grapes you drank wine. God provided so amply for him. Now we're going to come back and look at this section a little bit closer. But I want that fresh in your mind of how God provided. Now hold your finger there. And now go over to Ezekiel. And Ezekiel, we're going to go into the 16th chapter. Ezekiel 16, one of the saddest, heart-wrenching chapters in the entirety of the Bible, as far as I'm concerned. So look at verse 4, beginning. Ezekiel 16, verse 4. As for your birth, now he's talking in symbolic realm. On the day you were born, and he's talking about Israel. On the day you were born, your navel cord was not cut, nor were you washed with water for cleansing. You were not rubbed with salt or even wrapped in cloths. No eye looked with pity on you to do any of these things for you, to have compassion on you. Rather, you were thrown out into the open field. You were abhorred on the day you were born. When I passed by you and saw you squirming in your blood, I said to you, while you were in your blood, live. I said to you, while you were in your blood, live. This is God talking about Israel. He's saying, here's what I saw. You were not wanted. You were unloved. You were thrown away. I looked out there. I saw you, and I wanted something better for you. I made you numerous like plants of the field. There you grew up, became tall, reached the age for fine ornaments. Your breasts were formed, your hair had grown. Yeah, you were naked and bare. Then I passed by you, saw you. Behold, you were at the time for love. So I spread my skirt over you, covered your nakedness. I also swore to you and entered into a covenant with you so that you became mine. In other words, we began this relationship, i.e. spiritual marriage. Then I bathed you with water, washed off your blood from you, anointed you with oil. So when God's laying this out, he's looking at it from a couple of different standpoints. He's saying, no one wanted you, no one this, no one that. I wanted you. I did for you. I clothe you, verse 10, with embroidered cloth. Stop. Do you realize how hard it would have been to have embroidered cloth back then? I mean, amazing what they do. But now here, it's just not cloth, but someone has painstakingly gone through the process of embroidery. Belle Smith, most of you probably don't know her. She was Susie Ramsey's mother. And Susie Ramsey was the wife of David Ramsey, who was one of the elders of Lassen Street. Belle Smith would embroider the most intricate, beautiful things on fabric. Beautiful. And I think about watching her. Every year I'd go up and spend a week with Belle and E.B. Smith, and I would preach a series of lessons at Nevada. And I would watch her, and she would do the painstaking, meticulous embroidery. So when he talks about, I gave you embroidered skirt, that's not just something. That is beyond something. Marvelous. Then he goes on to say, then I passed by you and saw you, and behold, you were at the time, verse 9. No, actually, let's go to verse 10. I forgot where I was at there for a second. And put sandals of porpoise skin on your feet. Could you imagine how supple that must have been? I made sandals so supple. Jim was showing me his new shoes today. Oh, he was proud of his shoes. Proud of the price. But he said, oh, it's like walking. He didn't say this, but I'll say it. It's like walking on a cloud. Oh, so soft. So beautiful. It's like not having shoes on at all. And he said, that's what I did. I gave you these. So do you get the picture of what's going on? He talks about earrings. He talks about silver and gold. Talks about in verse 13 of what she was fed. Advanced to royalty. Your fame goes forth in verse 14. But, verse 15. Stop. We won't read 15 yet. See, it was by and through God's providence that Israel had everything. Absolutely everything. Now, the word providence, we banter around a lot. We talk about God's providence, and some individuals I've known in the church have even talked about being providentially hindered by God from doing something. And I don't see that. Because, see, the word providence, you can read it on the overhead. To make preparation for foreseeable or anticipated elements. Preparation for care and supervision. God's providence with Israel was evident in all that he did for it. And when they were without hope, God came down and delivered them. He provided the absolute best, the finest of finds for them at all times. But how did they treat him? How did they treat him? Now go back to Deuteronomy, 32nd chapter. And remember we were reading in verses 10 through 14? And it talked there about to ride on the high places of the earth. What that's referring to is conquest. God told Israel they would have conquest. Honey out of the rock and oil out of rocky flint. Where God would give them the land of Canaan. Their land would be overflowing with honey, olive trees, everywhere. The Mount of Olives. I mean, even when you think about Jesus' time, the Mount of Olives, rocky, craggy area, laden with olive trees. Butter of the herd, thick cream. That's what he's talking about. Fat of the lambs, the best of the lambs. Rams of Bashan, the finest breed. And Moses is pointing all this out in a projection forward as they get ready to go into the promised land. Now, when Ezekiel is writing what God tells him, he's looking back on what they'd done after God had provided everything, after God's providence had taken care of everything. But how did they return payment to God? How? Well, go back to Ezekiel 16 now. I mean, it's touched on there in Deuteronomy 32. But let's go over to Ezekiel 16 and drop in at verse 15. Now, remember earlier when we were reading in Deuteronomy 32, we talked about Israel grew fat and sleek and so on. Well, that's how they turned to God and turned away from him. They allowed him to do everything. And then they decided to, in essence, rebel at God, spit in his face. Here's how God phrases it in Ezekiel. But you trusted in your beauty, I'm reading in verse 15. You trusted in your beauty and played the harlot because of your fame, and you poured out your harlotries on every passerby who might be willing. You took some of your clothes made for yourself, made high places of various colors, played the harlot on them, which should never come about nor happen. You also took my beautiful jewels, and on and on. And I realize that when you read through that, the language is graphic. It is powerful. But it shows the depiction of this individual who had gone and just had alienated themselves to the maximum degree from God. With the final insult being that Israel gave itself up or would give itself up to worthless idols. Now that's what Moses projected. Deuteronomy 32. Ezekiel 16, Ezekiel looks back, or God looks back and said exactly what Moses said you would do, you did. So how could you have done that? Now, we're not going to spend the rest of the time looking at Ezekiel 16, but suffice it to say that as the 16th chapter unfolds, that God tells Israel, I want you back. I'm standing here waiting for you to return. Why? Because I love you. I'm concerned for you. And I want only the best. But see, what Israel had done was Israel had a self-inflicted brain cramp. I mean, I saw this picture and I went, that's it. That depicts it. And the pain that's associated when you realize you've done it to yourself. And Moses had warned them, be careful. You don't want to follow in any such pathway. Because it's going to alienate you from God. And it's going to take you down a pathway you don't want to go. Now you go, well, what's the point of all this? Here's the point. Austin this morning talked about when he looked into the mirror, he saw that man. And I knew what he was talking about. Everybody else did. Because when we look into the Word of God, there are times when we see ourselves. And when I look at Deuteronomy 32, and I look at Ezekiel 16, I come back and I say, well, is that us? Is that me? Is that me? Am I the one? Because I realize that God has truly blessed us. When Moses made that song, he was talking about the rock. The rock is Christ. We are on the receiving end of Jesus Christ and him crucified. We are. And how fortunate we are in that regards. And that was by and through the pre-planning by God. The providence of God that his son would come and afford us that chance. We're free moral agents. We can do what we want with whatever. Israel was a free moral agency. They could do whatever they want whenever. They chose the pathway that led them into so many destructive ways. All self-inflicted. So God has blessed us. But have we turned our back on God and shown to him ingratitude of his love? Wow. Kind of profound when you think of it. Do I show gratitude or ingratitude? Where am I at? We talk about our children sometimes, and that we marvel at how intuitive they are and how they come to us and thank us profusely for all that we've done for them. And at other times we wondered, where did this spawn come from? Because they are so ungrateful. You think God thinks the same thing? And so that's why it's imperative that we stand back and look at ourselves. Paul writes to the Galatians, in Galatians 5 and verse 7, he said, you were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? We were going great. Who hindered us? Who stopped us? And the answer is me. I'm the one that causes my problems. Just as Israel had put the brain cramp on themselves through in the things that I do the same thing. And so what I need to do is I need to be more cognizant of all that God has done for me. To be mindful of his love, his grace, his mercy. And I need to take up my cross daily and follow after him. We've been talking a lot about the cost of discipleship in Matthew, the 10th chapter, and verse 38 as one, but also over in Luke, the 14th chapter. The cost of discipleship is truly amazing. But when you think of all that God has done for us, it is the absolute least we can do. The least. He gave his all that we might have life and have it more abundantly. On Wednesday night, we've talked about, in the announcement, about the new class, dealing with attitudes. Have this attitude in yourself, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself into the form of a bondservant. Then we talk about Romans, the 8th chapter, and beginning there in verse 5. He talks about, for the mind set on the flesh is death, but the mind set on the spirit is life and is peace. Well, where's our mindset? Where's our mindset? That song that Moses made millennia ago, it's not just applicable to the children of Israel, but it is applicable to all of mankind and to all who would say that they are part of the household of God. So we need to learn from that. The things written before time were written for our instructions. And I know that those that lived after Moses had written that song as they were in the land of promise, and they were reminded of that song, they probably didn't give it much thought. They probably didn't give it much thought in the days of David, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and so on. But yet it was all coming to fulfillment in front of their very faces. And so we look back on it and we say, well, do we see it being fulfilled in us? We can learn the message. We can learn the lesson. In Proverbs, the 14th chapter, verse 14, Solomon writes, the backslider in heart will have his fill of his own ways, but a good man will be satisfied with his. When we look at ourselves, what do we see? Do we see someone who is appreciative of all that God has done? The ways that God has enriched us, provided for us in every facet of life? Or have we decided that, well, you know what? That's just what a parent does for a child. And I can go on my merry way doing what I want, how I want, and showing an attitude of ingratitude. And that's really the central lesson of the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32. And so we bring it down to us today, and each one of us needs to look deep inside of us and see if we are really appreciative of all that God has done. The lesson is yours this morning. But if there's any who might be subject to the invitation in any way, whether you need the prayers of the congregation for strength or encouragement, or to put on Christ in the waters of baptism for remission of sins, we did not talk about that in the lesson this morning. But we'll be glad to sit down and study with any who has any question regarding those things. Whatever is of a Bible concern, we'll be glad to talk to you. It was mentioned that you can reach us through mail. Yes, you can. Winnetka Church of Christ, P.O. Box 2711, Winnetka, California, 91396. Again, that P.O. Box number is 2711. My email address, real easy. I've had this thing for I've had it since 1997. WBE@WOLFENET.com. $5 a month to have that same email for all those years. Everybody goes, well, why don't you get Gmail? I have a Gmail account. It's free, I know. But boy, that WolfNet account is so easy to remember. 3 little initials and wolfwithanenet.com. I'd love to hear from you. I truly would.